My name is Owen Ramsey. I served 26 years in the United States Army and retired as a captain. At 51, I never imagined I'd be living in a rusty trailer, parked behind an abandoned gas station, staring at my bank app with $38 to my name. Retirement wasn't supposed to look like this. I thought I'd be teaching at a military college or running logistics at a firm somewhere. But a back injury from my last deployment turned into chronic pain, and before I knew it, my career ended 2 years early with a handshake and a box of plaques. I tried everything. A desk job here, warehouse shift there, even security gigs at nightclubs. Nothing lasted. The pain meds dulled my body, and the silence of civilian life dulled my mind. My wife left last year, said I was too distant, too angry, too broken. Maybe she was right. I haven't seen my daughter since Christmas. Most days, I sit on a folding chair outside the trailer and listen to the wind scrape across the dry plains. There's not much else to do. My fridge hums louder than the highway nearby. Sometimes I wonder how someone who led men into battle could become invisible in his own country. It was a Thursday when the letter came. A thin government envelope yellowed at the corners. Return Address, Department of Military Storage and Archival Services, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I almost tossed it, thinking it was another benefits denial. But the name caught my eye. It wasn't addressed to just Owen Ramsey. It said Captain Owen Ramsey, the rank, like someone remembered. Inside was a formal notice that a storage item registered to Floyd Ramsey had been assigned for release. Floyd Ramsey was my grandfather. A war vet, like me, except he served in World War I. We hadn't spoken much before he passed in '87. I was 13. The document said he had left a chest in secure storage labeled for retrieval only by his military kin. I was the last of those. I called the number listed, half expecting to be told it was a clerical error, but the woman on the line confirmed it. A large wooden chest, sealed and tagged under my name, was ready for pickup or delivery. I asked what was inside, but she said that the information was confidential until opened by the authorized recipient. I sat there for a long time after that call, holding the letter in one hand and my phone in the other. The delivery fee was $72. I had $38. For the first time in months, I felt something stir in my gut. Hope, no. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a chance. I didn't know what was in that box, but something about it felt important. Like maybe it held more than old medals or dusty keepsakes. Maybe it held answers. Or maybe it held a reason to get up tomorrow. Whatever it was, I knew I had to find a way to open it. My grandfather Floyd Ramsey was the kind of man who never spoke unless it mattered. He'd fought in Europe in World War. I came home with a silver star and a quiet stare that could stop a room. I only knew bits and pieces of his story, but even as a kid I felt the weight he carried behind those old eyes. He used to sit on the back porch in his rocker, smoking a pipe and watching the fields behind his house. When I was 8, I asked if I could sit next to him. He nodded once and didn't say a word for 20 minutes. Then he said, "If you want to understand a man, look at how he keeps his word." That was it. No explanation. Just that. It stuck with me. After he died in 1987, his things were divided up quietly. I was 13, too young to ask questions and too scared to speak in front of the adults. I remember standing by the flag-draped casket, wondering if anyone really knew who he was beyond the medals. That was the last time I thought about Grandpa Floyd for a very long time. So when I got the letter from the military storage facility, I was confused. The document stated that a wooden chest had been deposited under his name on August 3, 1987. It had been stored at Fort Jackson in a classified long-term archive program for military families. The file noted the chest was to be released only upon presentation of a valid military ID from a direct descendant who served. I was the only one who fit that description. A few days after I begged a buddy from my old unit to lend me the $34 I needed, the crate arrived. It was heavy, not oversized but dense. It came in a dark oak frame, worn at the corners, but locked tight with 2 rusted clasps and a military seal sticker still intact. The top was etched with 3 letters FHR, his full name, Floyd Henry Ramsey. There was no key included, no instructions either. But the delivery slip stated clearly that the chest could only be unlocked once the recipient confirmed their military credentials through a digital scan of their ID. A mobile officer from the base had to verify the opening. It was the kind of protocol usually reserved for high-security items, which made no sense for a family chest. I stared at it for hours. It sat in the corner of my trailer, looking out of place next to my fold-up cot and beat-up microwave. I didn't touch it for 2 days. I just sat with it like it was some sleeping animal. I kept thinking, what the hell did Grandpa lock in here? Photos, letters, dog tags, maybe something painful. Maybe something nobody was supposed to know. There was a sense of reverence I couldn't shake. This wasn't just old stuff in a box. This was something he buried in time. Something he trusted the future to deal with. And he chose me to find it. That meant something. On the 3rd day, I made the call to Fort Jackson, arranged for a credentialed officer to come out and verify me in person. I didn't know what I was opening, but I knew this wasn't just a chest. It was a message. 36 years in the dark, waiting for light. And something in my gut told me, once it opened, nothing in my life would ever be the same. The officer from Fort Jackson showed up in full uniform, scanned my ID, confirmed the documents, and stood silently. As I cracked the seal, my hands shook more than I expected. The lock clicked louder than it should have, like it had been waiting to break open for decades. Inside, everything was perfectly arranged. On top sat a folded cloth pouch, heavy and soft, the kind you'd store valuables in. I opened it slowly and found 15 gold coins older than anything I'd ever touched. Each one shimmered with age, not flash, not greed. Just weight. Generations, maybe. Beneath the pouch was a leather envelope with Grandpa's handwriting on the front. To Owen. That's all it said. The paper was worn but carefully sealed, and next to it, a second envelope, smaller, thick, deep red, with a wax stamp I didn't recognize. On the front, he had written 3 words, read this last. I opened the first letter with careful hands. Grandpa's handwriting was stiff but clear. The first line stopped my breath. If you are reading this, then the truth has waited long enough. I sat down without realizing it, the paper crinkling slightly as I tried to keep it steady. He wrote about the family ranch in Texas, how his father had built it from nothing, how oil was discovered in the early 70s as everything changed. He said the money caused a divide. My father, Thomas Ramsey, was always chasing something more. He married fast, moved faster, and resented the idea that the land was to be split evenly. According to Grandpa, after the stroke that put him in the hospital in '87, my father visited him with legal documents in hand. Documents Grandpa says he never signed. But somehow, when the will was read, everything had already been transferred to Thomas's name. The house, the land, the mineral rights, all of it. Grandpa wrote that he knew he'd been tricked, but he was too weak to fight, too tired, too ashamed that his own son could betray him like that. But he didn't give up. He began documenting everything, quietly, carefully, and this chest was where he hid it all. I sat there stunned. My own father, the man who used to bark orders at me like I was one of his subordinates, had stolen a fortune from his own father. And no one ever questioned it. We'd grown up thinking Grandpa left us nothing. That maybe he hadn't forgiven us. That he didn't care. But the truth was, he had cared. He just couldn't stop what was happening, so he left a trail instead. I felt my stomach twist, not from hunger, but from something deeper. A knot of disbelief, betrayal, and something worse. Shame. All this time I thought I had failed the family name. But it was my father who did that long before I ever put on the uniform. The coins were just the beginning. Grandpa didn't leave them for wealth. He left them as proof, a signal that this was real. That's what I was reading wasn't some fantasy cooked up by a bitter old man. It was the beginning of a reckoning, and I hadn't even opened the red envelope yet. Under the stack of gold coins and the 2 letters, I noticed a small compartment carved into the bottom of the chest. It was covered by a thin wooden panel nearly invisible, unless you ran your fingers along the edges like I did. I pried it open gently, not sure what I was expecting. But what I found made the hair on my arms stand straight up. There was a cassette tape sealed in a plastic sleeve labeled in black ink March 12, 1987. Next to it was a bundle of documents bound by an old leather strap. The paper was yellowed, but the seals and stamps on top were still visible. Deeds, copies of bank transfers, legal filings. Every page carried either Grandpa's signature or a notary's stamp. I didn't know exactly what it all meant yet, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just memorabilia. This was evidence. I dug out an old cassette player from a box of junk I hadn't touched in years. After switching out the batteries and blowing dust from the heads, I clicked the tape in place and hit play. The static crackled first, then a cough. Then voices. Grandpa's slow and deliberate, and then my father's. Faster, impatient, familiar. The tape was hard to listen to, not because of the sound quality, but because of what was said. Grandpa was confronting my father about changes made to the will while he was recovering from the stroke. My father didn't deny it. In fact, he admitted to drafting a new version using Grandpa's old signature from other documents to make it look official. He laughed, said no one would notice, that it was easier this way, cleaner. Grandpa's voice trembled, but he didn't yell. He asked him why. My father said something I'll never forget. Because I earned it. I did more for this family than you ever did. I sat there frozen, the cassette whirring forward, my father's voice filling the trailer like a ghost had slipped through the walls. The next part was Grandpa saying he'd find a way to make it right, that he couldn't undo what had been done, but he'd leave behind enough truth for someone to pick up the pieces. That someone, I realized, was me. I looked back at the documents. Among them were copies of the original land ownership files, mineral rights agreements, and the old will signed before the stroke. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to prove there had been foul play. Enough to raise questions. Enough to open a legal door. There was also a contact sheet, a name I didn't recognize at first. Edward Markson, attorney at Law Houston. Below it, a note in Grandpa's hand. He has the originals. Tell him Floyd sent you. I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like a soldier again, like I'd just been handed a mission. Grandpa didn't just want justice. He planned for it. He didn't scream. He didn't fight in court. He left a trail, a slow-burning fuse, waiting for the right hands to light it. This wasn't just about land or money. This was about truth, about dignity, about the kind of man Grandpa hoped I'd become. And as I held that tape in my palm, I knew one thing for sure. He believed I still could. I packed the chest, the cassette, the papers, and my uniform jacket into the back seat of my old sedan and drove straight through the night to Texas. I hadn't been back in years. Not since my father sold off the family home and moved into some luxury condo in Dallas. The drive felt like a return to something buried, something I had run from without knowing why. Houston was hotter than I remembered. The law office was tucked into a quiet strip near downtown. When I walked in and asked for Edward Markson, the receptionist gave me a long look before disappearing into the back. A few minutes later, a gray-haired man stepped out, blinking at me like he'd seen a ghost. He didn't ask for an appointment. He just waved me into his office and shut the door. When I told him who I was, he nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had just slid into place. He reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a heavy envelope marked to be released upon verification of Owen Ramsey's service. Inside were notarized originals of everything I'd seen in the chest. Grandpa had mailed them to Markson in 1987, along with instructions to release them only if I came looking. I sat there stunned, realizing just how long Grandpa had played the long game. He knew this day would come. He trusted I'd make it here. With everything in hand, Markson filed the petition to challenge the estate and open a fraud inquiry. We had the original will, the recordings, and a paper trail. Everything pointed to one man, my father. The process moved faster than I expected. By week's end, my father had been served, but he never answered the summons. He never showed up in court. 3 days before the hearing, he died. Massive heart attack at home. No warning. No final word. Just gone. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted justice, wanted to see him answer for what he did. But another part of me, one I hadn't listened to in a long time, just felt empty. Like the man I'd feared and hated for years had vanished before I could ever understand him. All I had left was silence and a long list of unanswered questions. The case didn't end there, though, because Grandpa had one more surprise waiting. After the court accepted the evidence and closed the fraud investigation posthumously, the estate went into dispute. Most of the assets had been moved into trusts under my father's new wife's name. I figured that was the end of the road, but Markson asked me to sit down again. He pulled out a deed transfer from 1986. It showed that Grandpa had quietly repurchased 10% of the oil company shares in his own name. Not under the ranch, not tied to the will. Purely his. And on the last page was a transfer clause dated 1987. In the event of his death, the shares were to be transferred to Captain Owen Ramsey, United States Army. I stared at the document, unable to speak. The shares had appreciated over the decades. The oil fields had boomed. That 10% was now worth just under $3 million. It wasn't the full fortune, but it was enough to matter. Enough to start over. Enough to change everything. I walked out of that office numb. Not from the money. From what it meant. Grandpa had never said a word. Never wrote me a birthday card after I turned 13. But in silence, he had done more for me than my father ever had. He left me proof, a path, and a piece of the legacy my father tried to erase. Standing in the Texas sun, I realized justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes in layers across years in the form of dusty boxes and quiet plans. Grandpa hadn't just fought a war overseas. He'd fought one inside our family. And in the end, he'd won. Not with guns. With faith. With patience. With love I didn't even know it was still out there. I waited until I got back to my trailer to open the red envelope. I don't know why. Maybe I needed everything else to settle first. Maybe I was scared of what it might say. There was something final about it, like the last note in a song you didn't want to end. The wax cracked clean when I peeled the flap open. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, folded once. Grandpa's handwriting filled the page, the same steady strokes as before. He started by saying he hoped I'd found the truth, and that if I was reading this, then he trusted I'd do the right thing with what came next. He didn't talk about the money. Not once. He talked about duty, about what it meant to wear the uniform, about how wars aren't always fought with bullets. He said his generation didn't have the words for trauma or healing, but they carried it all the same. He wrote about the men he served with, how some came home to nothing. How they died alone in alleys or in borrowed beds long forgotten by the country they fought for. He said no soldier should ever feel abandoned once the war ends. No child of a fallen Marine should ever wonder where their next meal is coming from. Then he asked me if I could do something better with what he left. He didn't demand. He wasn't guilty. He just said he believed I could carry something forward. A name. A mission. A home. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it up, slid it into my chest pocket, and sat outside for a long time. The sky above the trailer was soft and orange, like it had been the night I got the call about the chest. Except this time I didn't feel empty. I felt full, scared, grateful, alive. That winter, I sold the trailer and used part of the money to buy an old lodge on the outskirts of San Antonio. It had 10 rooms, a kitchen, and enough land to grow vegetables in the back. I renovated it with help from a few old Army buddies and local volunteers. Hang Grandpa's flag in the main hall. Painted the name above the front porch myself. Ramsey Legacy Home. It started with 4 men, then 6, then 2 widows and a little girl whose father had died in Afghanistan. We built bunk beds, started group therapy, and got a van donated by a local church. Some days are quiet. Some are hard, but none of them are empty. Every person who walks through that door is someone worth fighting for. I tell them stories sometimes. About a man who never raised his voice but changed my life with silence. About a chest that waited 36 years to be opened. About the idea that love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it plans. Sometimes it prepares. I don't know what my father would say if he saw this place. Maybe he'd laugh. Maybe he'd get angry. But that doesn't matter anymore. Because this wasn't built in his image. It was built in Grandpa's. In honor. In duty. In quiet, steady love. He didn't just leave me money. He left me something bigger. A reason to stand back up. A way to serve again. And now every time someone finds a bed here or a meal or just a moment of peace, I know. His mission lives on. Through me. Through them. Through all of us.